All right, so I'm just going to, this is just the body paragraph section on Canvas. And so I'm just going to talk that I posted for this week, right, where the essay is due. So I was going to kind of talk just a little bit about like the structure of body paragraphs, and then we'll look at like an example and kind of think about how that structure relates to you building your body paragraph for this essay, right? So we talked about last week, focused on introduction specifically, right? And building kind of the components of building an intro paragraph. So then if we think about the definition of a paragraph, right? Like, and that we're defining a paragraph as a group of sentences that are working together to support an idea, right? So if we just think like, it doesn't really matter necessarily the length, right? Sometimes some paragraphs are going to be longer, some paragraphs are going to be shorter, right? It really depends on how complex of an argument you're creating in that paragraph, how much information you have to put into that paragraph, right? But if we think about it for the context of this essay, if your essay is going to be focusing on, let's say, 3 sources for motivation, right? 3 educational artifacts. And then each one of your body paragraphs is going to focus on a group of sentences that are supporting an idea, then there's going to be 3 body paragraphs for this essay, right? For this essay, I'm not like requiring you to do a conclusion. We didn't get to talk about conclusion for this essay. We'll move on to it for the next one. But if you want to write a conclusion and kind of give a concluding paragraph your best shot, that's awesome. But I won't be grading your paper. If it has a conclusion or doesn't have a conclusion, it's not going to factor into the grade of this essay. But instead, we're really focusing on building an introduction and then building body paragraphs. Sorry, hang on, let me close my window. The neighbor's got the lawnmower going. All right, I didn't know if that was bleeding through my computer microphone because I don't have my AirPods in.
I didn't hear anything. But
yeah. Okay, well, just the same. I was worried that I would post this video or people would be sitting there and it's like, with like a lawnmower weed or going off in the background. So at any rate, so if we think about that, then there's going to be your introduction and then 3 body paragraphs, right? If you have 3 educational artifacts. And so each one of those body paragraphs focuses on an educational artifact, right? A group of sentences focused on that. Then you move on to the next group of sentences, focus on the next educational artifact, and so on. So instead of thinking about how long does a body paragraph need to be as far as the number of sentences, you should think about what should a body paragraph do, right? Because there's not a set number of sentences, or there's not like a determined rule or kind of defined rule of like a paragraph is X number of sentences, right? But when I think about the structure of paragraphs, I think about like, what is the job that a paragraph should accomplish? And so in that context, that's how we're going to talk about paragraph structure. And, you know, when it comes to writing things throughout the semester, whether it's, you know, introductions or how to integrate quotations or how to build body paragraphs or even how to write whole entire essays, there's not one right way to do it, right? There's not like this is the way to write an essay, or this is the way to write a paragraph, or this is the way to integrate a quote, or any of the things that we'll be focusing on this semester. Instead, kind of think about it as like, I'll be showing you effective ways of doing that, right? I'll be showing you like effective strategies of putting it together. And I think about it kind of like, as like, we're building, kind of developing like these toolboxes for writing and reading strategies, and then trying to give you as many tools as I can, or help you develop those tools. And then whenever a certain job requires a tool, you have kind of like this really well put together toolbox, right? Where you can be like, oh, this will work well here, or this will work well there, right? And sometimes depending on the reason that we need a specific structure could depend on the context for what we're writing. So maybe we would write completely different if I had an in-class essay, for example, in like a general ed class, like a history class. And on the exam, I had to write an in-class essay, right? As part of the exam, one of those essay questions on a test. I know really well how to structure that, right? I know like maybe like that kind of 5-paragraph essay might work pretty well there. But if I think about maybe a different style of thinking about an essay or a paragraph in maybe a less rigid way, then maybe I could think about like, well, what are the jobs that this paragraph should do? And I think that's really effective for the context we're writing for this class. But again, it's all just like, I'm not showing you like, this is the one way of doing it. I'm just saying like, this is an effective way of taking care of this job of writing a body paragraph. So if we think about a body paragraph, what it should have, right? And we might have learned this in different ways along the way. Like I've learned it from different teachers, and a lot of these same things have had different names. So sometimes we think about body paragraphs in the context of like topic sentence, main idea, secondary support, or topic sentence, primary support, secondary support, or major details and minor details. It's all essentially kind of the same thing, right? It's just different names. And I've learned it a bunch of different ways. I'm sure Chris has learned it a bunch of different ways. You've learned it a bunch of different ways, spanning from whichever new teacher you have, probably from like 5th grade through now, right? Like there's different names, but it's all kind of naming it the same thing. So for this class, I don't really talk about body paragraphs in the context of main idea, major detail, minor detail, topic sentence. I try not to use a lot of those labels because I know by this point, people have heard it labeled different things, even though we're talking about the same thing. Instead, when I talk about body paragraphs for this class, I talk about it in the context of here's what a paragraph should have. So I think that an effective body paragraph, you can think about it as having a point, examples or explanation, and analysis. So the structure that's always made sense to me is to think about a body paragraph in the context of like, tell me, show me, so what? What is your claim? What is your evidence? What is your analysis? And I think that's kind of a really familiar way that like we go through, crafting arguments in every context, right? Even an informal argument. If I were to say, oh, this is my favorite movie or this is my favorite restaurant, that's my claim, right? And then I'm going to give evidence, right? If I were to say, I don't know, last night I went and ate this really good Mediterranean restaurant that I never tried before. And I were to say like, I really like this Mediterranean restaurant. There's my claim. What's my evidence? One of the reasons that I really like this Mediterranean restaurant was the food was delicious. Now I'm going to start diving deeper into that with more evidence. For example, and I start giving those specific details. And then that analysis is that kind of so what? Like, how does that claim, that evidence that I'm giving connect back into why I think this is a really good restaurant? And it's the same thing with the structure of this essay. So if you look down here at kind of like this body paragraph and development section, here, tell me, just think about it. This is the point. This is that main idea, right? Like this is what the whole paragraph should be focusing on. So here it would be something along the context of what is this specific artifact for this body paragraph going to be? What is this paragraph focusing on? So make sure that you're being specific, that like, maybe whatever artifact you're focusing on, one of the things that helps motivate me through school is a picture that I have of, me and my children, right? Whatever the case is, there's a claim that you're making. Or one of the things that helps motivate me through school is, a piece of advice that my grandfather gave me. There's a claim, right? There's a tell me. The next piece of it, that show me. Think about this in the context of like, this is your evidence, right? This is the detail, the examples, the experiences, right? You want to make sure that you're using a lot of detail in this section of your body paragraph, because like we talked about last week and early on with the writing process, your reader doesn't know your story. So your reader can't draw your conclusion. I mean, maybe in some situations your reader does, right? If you hand it to a family member and have them read it or whatever, but like if I'm reading it or Chris is reading it or you're reading each other's essays, like we don't know, right? Like we don't know your stories. We don't know the details. I can't assume that you know what I'm getting ready to talk about, right? I have to make sure that I'm giving my reader enough detail. Think about it when you're writing a paragraph or when you're writing to somebody, there's a writer and a reader, right? And the same way that if you're having a conversation with somebody, you should think about it in that same way, because like writing and reading is a discourse in the same way that a conversation is a discourse. But when we're in a conversation, we're conversing with somebody, I can ask follow-up questions, right? That's kind of how a conversation works. It's not just like me talking at you in a conversation, you just sitting there like quietly, right? But instead, if we're having a conversation, I'm like, oh, okay, well, one of the things that helps motivate me through school is this. And then you'd be like, oh, well, where'd you get it? Oh, I got it from my grandfather. Oh, okay, how old were you when you got it? Or why is it important to you, right? Like we ask follow-up questions and we give more information. Think about it really in the same way that like we almost, when we're writing, we have to kind of predict like what are the questions the reader is going to have so they can feel like they follow along with this example that I'm giving. So here again, just assume that your reader doesn't know about this experience, your reader doesn't know about this artifact, and they need details to be able to follow along with this.
I also think of that in the context of like providing your reader with a satisfying argument, right? And again, it's like the same thing when we're talking in person. If I said like, The Witcher is my favorite TV show, and as to why, I'm just like, because it's really good. It's like, that's not really a satisfying argument. That's not going to leave whoever I'm talking to like convinced that it's a good show or that like there's a reason why I like it. I need to start giving evidence of like, I think the characters are really well written. I think the world is really interesting. Like providing that evidence really shows your audience that like you've thought about this argument and that your details make sense for what you're trying to prove.
And to Chris's point, if we don't have a context for The Witcher, like I've heard of The Witcher, I've seen like maybe a little bit of a trailer for The Witcher. I have friends who watch it, but I don't know anything about it. So if he says that the characters are really well developed or that it's a great show, I don't know if The Witcher is about, you know, a spin-off from Macbeth and it's about the three witches and, you know, hanging around their pot. I don't know if it's about you know, someone flying on a broomstick. I don't know if it's about a dude going around fighting people with swords. Right? I have no idea what the show is about. So in that situation, it's a place where Chris has to make sure that he's giving details to the reader, because the reader could, in some cases, have a lot of context, or the reader could have zero context and needs that information. And so when we think about the context that the reader needs, think about what details, because what you don't want to do is just feel like you have to write way too much, right? Think about what details does the reader need, are the details that are relevant to support the reason why this person, thing, advice, whatever, are great sources of motivation for you through school. So for example, let's say a person is a source of motivation. Well, if I was going to focus on, I don't know, saying that like my dad was a source of motivation for me to go to school, right? It really depends on what details I'm going to choose in that show me section to include, depend on what the point is I want to prove about him and why he was a source of motivation. Would I give physical description of him? No, it's not relevant, right? Because the reason that I'm going to say my dad was a source of motivation is to see how hard my dad worked, right? To see that, you know, how difficult it was for my dad immigrating from this country when he was a teenager, and the different jobs that I saw him work along the way, and how that work ethic is inspiring to me, right? And so maybe his physical description is not important, but let's say my dad was a college athlete, for example, and I also wanted to, I don't know, play soccer, I don't know, collegiately when I was in school. And if I were to say, maybe there's a picture of my dad when he was younger playing soccer, and I would be like, in this physical description, I can see, you know, the strength in my dad's legs, or I can see him out on the field, or I can see, you know, how fast he was or whatever. Now maybe the physical description becomes important because that's relevant to why I'm inspired by the work that he was doing, or why I was inspired by him as an athlete, right? So it really depends on what are the details I'm including are relevant into what the point is that I'm trying to prove to you, right? And so kind of really think about that as like your examples. It's not about like you have to include everything. It's just like I'm including this to prove this point, right? If I'm trying to prove a different point, then maybe, like I said, physical description is not relevant if I'm focusing on work ethic. And then maybe if I'm focusing on advice that he gave me, maybe his work ethic is not as important as it is that conversation that we had when he gave me the advice, or whatever the case is, right? So just make sure that like the examples that you need to include are ones that help your reader follow along so they can see how you're supporting that claim that you're making. And then, so if we think about that, the context of these two in this essay, there's the tell me, right? What is the artifact you're going to focus on in this paragraph? And then the show me, thoroughly describe the artifact, things to think about, like where'd you get it? How long have you had it? If it's a person, describe your relationship with them. If it's a physical item, maybe you can give a detailed description. If it's advice, who gave it to you? When did you get the advice? And again, remember, the reader doesn't have context for this. So let me give a quick example. This is a source, an educational artifact that I might focus on, right? So I want to say a source of inspiration for me to pursue an education is a saxophone that my grandfather bought me, right? So my grandfather bought me a saxophone when I was in school. And I would say that of the things that I have that I kind of carried with me from a young age through adulthood, this has served as a source of inspiration for me. So now if I think about the show me, you're my outsiders, you're my readers, right? And you don't have a context for this. What information do you need in order to feel like you can follow along with why this is a source of motivation for me? What do you two think? What details would you need me to develop in the show me section of this, in this part of the paragraph, throughout the examples of my body paragraph?
Why is the saxophone like significant, the one that he bought you? Like,
Yeah.
Why did he buy it for you?
Okay, so maybe why did he get it for me? What else do we think we need to know?
Did you want the saxophone, or was it just like kind of like a random gift?
Yeah, exactly. So maybe that why did I get it, right? Did I want it? Was it a random gift, right? Maybe what other details would you need to know about how it's a source of inspiration?
Who was your grandfather to you?
Yeah, how
Yeah.
close was I? Exactly.
What was your relationship like?
Mhm. So these are all really important questions because otherwise you don't know, right? So kind of to go on Nicholas's original point, if I were to just say, like, if it's a random gift, if it's one day my grandpa was like, hey, I think you should play the saxophone. Okay, maybe he just bought one or found one at a garage sale and brought it to me, right? That could have been the truth of that story. Maybe my relationship with my grandfather was like, oh, he's nice, but I don't see him very often. He lives across the country, and he, sent me this saxophone that he found at a garage sale in the mail. He thought it'd be fun for me to learn how to play it. That tells a very different story than what the real one would be, which was the relationship that I had with my grandfather. He lived 2 doors down from me. I grew up with him like a second dad to me. I played saxophone starting in 4th grade. By the time that I was getting ready to go into high school, my saxophone was really crappy and I needed a new one. My grandfather always supported me. He would always ask me to practice for him. He would always ask me to play. He would always ask me how band was going. He was constantly encouraging me. And then before I started high school, he spent, even though he didn't have a ton of money, saxophones unfortunately are super expensive instruments. Even okay ones can be very expensive, but he spent a good chunk of money and bought me a pretty high-end saxophone to get ready to go into high school because he believed in me and in that passion that I had. That shows a very different example than what the other one could. But those are details that you need for me as a reader that I would include in the show me part of this section of the body paragraph. Does that make sense? And then, so what? What do you think I should include? So now the so what section, right? If I go back over here, when I talk about analysis for this class, I'll ask the question, so what, right? So you might see me write so what on your paper as far as analysis goes. Sometimes so what can seem like a condescending question, right? If someone were to be like, oh yeah, I was my grandpa bought me a saxophone when I was in high school. I'd be like, oh, so what, right? That's never what I mean when I say so what, or when I maybe write so what on a paper. Instead, so what that's the analysis behind an idea, right? So what is the question that we're kind of always asking ourselves, right? Even something as simple as I don't know, when I get ready to go, I went out and rode my bike yesterday. And before I went on a bike ride, I went outside and I kind of stood there for a second and I just kind of felt the weather. And then my so what was, do I wear a long sleeve shirt or do I wear a short sleeve shirt when I go out? It's your analysis, right? It's your so what. It's you go to the store and you're you have a budget on what you want to spend on maybe some new clothes, and you kind of just do the so what. Well, so the analysis is I'll buy this, but I won't buy that, or whatever the case is, right? It's that question we're constantly asking ourselves. We look at the evidence and then we say, so what? What is the conclusion that I'm trying to make to my reader? So think about, how does this example, the examples that you're including in the body paragraph, work to support the claim that you're making? So in other words, if we think about it for the context of this essay, your analysis should explain how this artifact motivates you or motivated you through your academic journey. Why is it so important to you? So if I think about that in the context of this essay, then I would need to give details here. So how did this saxophone serve as a source of motivation for me throughout college? So I need to think about what information do you need to know, right? Like what information do I need to provide you as my reader to show you here is how this served as a source of motivation for me. So one of the things that I would say is analysis that my grandfather passed away shortly after he gave it to me, right? That's relevant to why it's so important to me. The next thing that I want to say is like, even though I didn't major in music, I thought I was going to be a music major when I started college, and I didn't, right? I ended up going into English, and that's why, you know, I'm not teaching you about, I don't know, scales and relative minors and saxophones and stuff like that right now, right? But even though I didn't major in music, the saxophone represents how much he supported me and believed in me. And then maybe I would give an example of how I used it, or maybe would look at it when I felt overwhelmed during school, right? That like I kept it. And I really don't play saxophone very much anymore, right? Like, or it's been quite a while. Every once in a while I'll take it out and like irritate my kids and play like a little song or whatever and like show them that I used to know how to play it. But like, I don't play it much anymore. And I didn't really play it when I was in college, but like I brought it with me when I moved away to school, just because it's important to me. It's kind of like that physical reminder of like him believing in me. And so there were times where it feels really overwhelming in school, right? Where I had like big deadlines, or I felt homesick, or I had all this kind of stuff going on when I moved away to college after Solano. And it's like bringing that with me made me feel like supported, made me feel that like, even though he's not around anymore and didn't get to see me, you know, hit some major milestones in my life, it feels like that drove me, that pushed me, right? And so that's kind of the way to think about structuring your body paragraph, right? Think about it as like, these are the things that your body paragraphs for this essay should have, right? The details that you need, assuming that your reader doesn't know about the background of this, of the example of the artifact you're focusing on, what's specific about it, why it's a source of motivation for you, what details they need to know, is really flushing that out and developing out through the body of this essay. Any questions on this at all?
No, I thought you really covered everything I was looking for, to be honest. Like
Cool.
now I'm full understanding
Yeah.
of all the body paragraphs.
Okay, cool. So yeah, so then for this week, right? So then the essay is going to be due, if I just go, you'll just turn the essay in right here by the end of the day on Sunday, right? Is when the essay is due. The other thing that I just wanted to show you really quickly while you're here, and then I'm also recording this is the rubric right where you turn in the essay, right? So to turn in the essay, if I just go into student view, you'll just be able to click start assignment. And if anyone has either of you or people who are watching this recording, if you have any questions at all on how to link either your Google Docs account, right? So you just click some start assignment, and you can either go to Google Drive. If you haven't linked your Google Docs account, it'll let you link it right here to Canvas, and you can just put it right in there. And then once it's linked, all of your docs, Google Slides, all of your stuff from your Google Drive is there for you to just upload to Canvas. Or if you're using Microsoft Word, you can just upload a file here. The only program that doesn't work well with Canvas is Pages for Mac, but you can save a Pages file as a PDF or as a Word doc, and then it'll work fine. But if it's a Pages file, it doesn't work in Canvas. For some reason, they still don't work well with each other. If you have questions about that at all, then I'm totally happy to show you how to convert the file or upload your paper. But what I wanted to show you here, so after, as far as like submitting it, is this is the tool that I use to grade your essays. So every time that I give an essay over the course of the semester, you'll also have a grading rubric associated with that essay, right? Which is basically like, here's where I'm putting the points. Here's what kind of categories of your essay are worth X number of points, right? So the bulk of every essay you write for this class, because the most important thing by far in your writing are your ideas. Like that's what I care about more than anything else, right? So I reflect that in the amount of points that they're worth. And you can see right out of the gate, like 40 of the possible 60 points for this essay are in the development and the support. So are the ideas of your body paragraphs clear? Are they fully developed? Are you giving examples? Are you giving details about the educational artifact? Are you giving analysis about how it impacted you, right? Like that's where the bulk of your points is, and that's going to be true for every essay. There's 5 points as far as having a clear thesis statement, right? Making sure that there's a central idea for your essay. Organization and clarity is 10 points, right? Which is like, are your paragraphs, each one focused on educational artifact? Are your ideas presented clearly? Can I kind of follow along with your essay? And then formatting, is a paper double spaced? Is it have an MLA heading, right? And so if it does, 5 points. Maybe if it's missing some stuff, maybe it's like 4 or 5 points or 3 or whatever the case is. And so when I grade your papers, and I'll start grading, after this weekend, right, when they're submitted, you'll see I can make comments in here, right, like right next to where the points are. But also most of the comments I'm going to be making are going to be right on the essay. So I'll be able to like click these little like kind of blue blips. They look like little blue circles, or almost like little blue like mini exclamation points or something. But like I can just click somewhere in the essay and then write my comments. And I really, because remember our essays are open for revision, right? So when you're done writing them and turning them in after they're graded, you can revise them for a new grade if you want to. So the comments that I make to you, I try to make like very conversational, like I'm asking you follow-up questions, helping you flesh out your ideas, as opposed to like, making a statement about like the grammar in your writing or the clarity of your writing. Sometimes, that if that's relevant, there'll be comments there also, but a lot of it is like, how did this make you feel? What example could you support this idea? Do you think that this is what the writer meant when they argued this point? Or like, it's things that kind of help you flesh out your ideas and think about them if you're planning on revising the paper. In addition to me grading them this way, one of the things that I can also do anytime that you would like is I can meet with you on Zoom and I can grade your paper with you face to face, right? Or computer screen to computer screen. And it's a really nice opportunity for us to just kind of talk through your paper and give you the opportunity to ask any questions as I'm grading it. Me the opportunity to talk to you in like really detail about like, here's a specific area and here's why I think this is a really strong point, or here's where you can develop your ideas. And so I'm always happy to do that with you also. And it can seem a little scary at first, although I try to assure you that it's not. But like once students do it, I have some students that only want to have their papers graded face to face. That's one of the real nice benefits of Zoom, is like I can share the screen with you. We can look at your essay together and really talk through some things so that my comments are as clear as possible. I try to be as absolutely transparent as possible with the grading process. So if there's ever a time where I made a comment on your paper that you didn't understand, or a grade on your paper that you don't quite know how I got there, or that you don't agree with, please, please, please talk to me. And I'm totally happy to sit down with you and have a conversation with you about like where your paper is and look at the assessment of your writing, and we can talk all through that together. Cool. So then this is due on, like I said, on Sunday. And then if either of you have any specific questions about your intro or where you're going with your essay, we stick around and I can chat with you about it.
Yeah.